The words on First Sergeant Brennan's notepad read like a stranger's life. Dedicated soldier. Quiet professional. Will be missed. He crossed out the last line and tried again, searching for something that sounded genuine about a man he had spent 2 years trying to transfer out of his company. Staff Sergeant Daniel Kwan had been missing for 19 hours. The rain hammered against the headquarters window at Joint Base Lewis McChord, turning the Cascade Mountains into gray shadows in the distance. Somewhere in those mountains, search teams were calling off their efforts. The weather had won. Command had made the decision an hour ago. Presumed dead. The words carried a weight that Brennan should have felt more heavily than he did. Captain Osei stood near the map table, his finger tracing the ravine system where Kwan had last been seen during the navigation training exercise. The drop was nearly 300 feet of loose rock and dense forest. Nobody survived a fall like that, especially not in this weather. The captain's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the topographic lines, as if staring hard enough might change what they showed. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you are watching from. Maybe you have witnessed the kind of loyalty that refuses to give up on someone. Brennan looked down at his notepad again. The memorial service would be in 3 days, assuming they recovered the body. He had never written a eulogy before. Never expected his first would be for someone he had openly questioned during every evaluation cycle. The door opened and Specialist Maya Torres stepped inside, her uniform soaked through despite the rain gear. Her boots left wet prints across the floor. She had been with the search teams, had insisted on staying out longer than her shift required. Now she stood in the doorway, water dripping from her patrol cap, her dark eyes moving from Brennan to the captain and back again. "You called off the search," she said. It was not quite a question. Captain Osei turned from the map. "The weather service is calling for freezing temperatures tonight. The terrain is unstable. We cannot risk more personnel." Torres. She did not move from the doorway. Her hands hung at her sides, fingers curled into fists that she seemed to be working very hard to keep from clenching tighter. He could still be alive. Brennan set down his pen. The fall alone would have killed him. "Specialist. You saw the ravine." "I saw a lot of territory we did not search thoroughly," Torres replied. Her voice stayed level, controlled, but something sharp lived underneath it. "I saw areas where someone with training could find shelter." Staff Sergeant Kwan has that training. Had that training, Brennan corrected. Past tense seemed appropriate now. Torres took 3 steps into the room, her boots squelching. "With respect, First Sergeant, we do not know that. We have not found a body. We have not found evidence of a fatal fall. We found his rucksack caught in branches. Yes, but that only proves he fell part of the way. Not that he fell all the way. Not that he died." Captain Osei moved between them, his command voice gentle but firm. "I understand your concern, Torres. Kwan was a good NCO, but the reality is that even if he survived the initial fall, he is in sub-freezing temperatures with minimal gear. The probability of survival decreases with every hour." "Then why are we standing here instead of searching?" Torres said. The words came faster now, the control slipping. "Why are we writing him off after 19 hours when the survival manual says 3 days minimum before declaring someone non-recoverable in this terrain?" Brennan stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Because the survival manual also accounts for weather conditions, available resources, and risk to additional personnel, all of which make continued search operations untenable." Torres turned to face him fully. Her jaw was set in a way that reminded Brennan of why she had washed out of Ranger School on her first attempt. Too stubborn to know when to quit. She repeated that mistake in her second attempt too, kept pushing through a stress fracture until she collapsed during a ruck march. Some people never learned that determination alone was not enough. "Staff Sergeant Kwan would not give up on any of us," Torres said quietly. "If it was you out there, First Sergeant, he would still be searching." The words hung in the room like an accusation. Captain Osei cleared his throat, redirecting the conversation. "Torres, you are dismissed. Get some dry clothes and some rest. That is an order." She stood motionless for 3 seconds that felt much longer. Then she came to attention, rendered a perfect salute, and executed an about-face that would have impressed a drill sergeant. The door closed behind her with careful precision. Not quite a slam, but close enough to make the point. Brennan sat back down and picked up his pen. She's going to be a problem. She cares about her NCO, Captain Osei said. That is not a character flaw. It is when it clouds judgment. Brennan returned to his notepad, then paused. You know, Quan saved her life once. Back at Fort Benning during their basic training cycle. She fell through ice during a winter field exercise. He pulled her out. I did not know that, the captain said. Quan never mentioned it. Never put himself in for a commendation. Never brought it up. That was his way. Did his job, kept his head down, expected nothing in return. Brennan tapped the pen against the paper. Made him easy to overlook. The captain moved to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. What will you say at the service? Brennan looked at the words he had written. Dedicated soldier. Quiet professional. The truth was that he did not know what to say about Daniel Quan because he had never really tried to know the man. Quan was competent, yes. Reliable, certainly. But he never fit Brennan's vision of what an infantry NCO should be. Too quiet. Too careful. Too willing to question orders when he thought they put soldiers at unnecessary risk. That last quality had created the rift between them. 8 months ago, Brennan had ordered a training exercise that Quan believed was too dangerous in the conditions. Quan had voiced his concerns through proper channels. Brennan had overruled him. A soldier had been injured. Nothing career-ending, but enough to require medical evacuation and 3 months of recovery. Quan never said I told you so. He never had to. The knowledge lived between them, unspoken but always present. I will say he served with honor, Brennan finally answered. I will say he cared about his soldiers. I will say we were diminished by his loss. All of which was true, technically, but it felt hollow even as he said it. Words chosen for their appropriateness rather than their authenticity. Captain Osei turned from the window. We should notify his family. His parents are in California, correct. San Francisco, Brennan confirmed. He kept their photo in his rucksack. They immigrated from Hong Kong before he was born. Never really understood why he joined the army instead of going to college like they wanted. The captain nodded slowly. That makes this harder. They will have questions we cannot answer. They want to know why we stopped searching. 19 hours earlier, Staff Sergeant Daniel Quan had been laughing. The moment felt important to remember now, wedged as he was between 2 moss-covered boulders in a ravine that smelled like wet earth and rotting pine needles. He had been laughing because Corporal Chun had tripped over his own bootlace for the 3rd time that morning, and Lieutenant Vance had finally lost patience and ordered the entire squad to practice tying their boots like they were in basic training again. Simple moments, the kind that made up most of military life between the chaos. Now Quan focused on keeping his breathing steady despite the cold that had worked its way through his wet uniform and into his bones. His left ankle was swollen inside his boot, possibly broken from the fall. His right shoulder screamed every time he moved, though he could still rotate it, so probably not dislocated. His ribs ached with each breath, but the breaths came clean without the bubbling sensation that would mean punctured lung. He had inventoried his injuries 3 times in the past hour, partly to assess his condition and partly to keep his mind sharp. Altitude and cold could make a person stupid. Stupid got you killed. The fall had not been dramatic. No action movie tumbled down a cliff face. Just one moment of solid ground, and the next moment of nothing as the rain-slick earth gave way beneath his boots. He remembered the sensation of falling through branches, the impacts that probably saved his life by slowing his descent. He remembered the final collision with the boulder that knocked the wind from his lungs and left him staring up at a canopy of trees that blocked most of the gray sky. He had lain there for perhaps 10 minutes before attempting to move. Long enough to understand that he was alone and injured in terrain that had already claimed lives during previous training rotations. Long enough to accept that getting angry about it would burn energy he needed to conserve. His rucksack was gone. He had felt it tear away during the fall, watched it tumble further down the slope until it disappeared into the dense undergrowth. That rucksack held his bivy sack, his dry clothes, most of his food, and the photo of his parents standing in front of their restaurant in San Francisco. The photo his mother had insisted he carried despite his protests that he was 32 years old and did not need a picture to remember what his parents looked like. What he had left was his patrol cap, somehow still on his head, his rigger's belt with canteen and knife, his compass, a waterproof case in his cargo pocket containing matches and a basic first aid kit, the protein bar he had stashed in his jacket pocket that morning. He also had 12 years of Army training and a stubborn refusal to make his mother right about the military being too dangerous. The ravine he had fallen into ran roughly northwest, cutting through the mountain like a wound. The sides were steep, but not vertical, covered in loose rock and thick vegetation. Water ran along the bottom, probably feeding into one of the larger creek systems. In summer, this would be a pleasant hike. In late October, with freezing rain and dropping temperatures, it was a death trap. Quan shifted position carefully, testing his ankle. Pain flared bright and immediate. Definitely broken or severely sprained. Either way, walking was going to be an experiment in controlled agony. But staying still was not an option. The cold would kill him long before dehydration or hunger became factors. He needed shelter. He needed to get dry. He needed to signal his location. In that order, the boulders that had broken his fall also created a small overhang, maybe 4 feet deep and wide enough for a person to squeeze into. Not ideal, but better than full exposure. Quan pulled himself backward into the space, using his good leg and his arms to drag himself across the wet ground. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through his ankle and ribs, but he kept moving until he was fully under the overhang with solid rock above his head and on 3 sides. Better. Not good, but better. He pulled out the waterproof case and checked its contents. 4 waterproof matches, 1 small roll of medical tape, 2 packets of antibiotic ointment, 3 adhesive bandages that would be useless for anything serious. Not much, but more than nothing. The first aid training from a decade ago came back in his father's voice, incongruously. His father, who had never served in any military, who had built a successful restaurant through careful planning and attention to detail. Plan your work, work your plan, his father always said when Quan was growing up. It applied to cooking and it applied to survival. Plan, get dry, create insulation from the ground, conserve energy, signal for rescue. Work, gather dry material from under the overhang where rain had not reached. Use the knife to cut evergreen boughs for ground insulation. Keep movements deliberate and efficient. Quan began pulling moss and dry debris from the deepest part of the overhang, creating a mat of organic material between himself and the cold ground. The work was slow, complicated by his injuries, but it gave him a task, and tasks gave him purpose. Purpose kept panic at bay. He had been on survival exercises before, had practiced these skills in controlled environments with instructors watching and helicopters on standby. This was different. This was real in a way that training never quite captured. Nobody was coming to check on him in 2 hours. Nobody was grading his shelter construction or evaluating his fire-starting technique. The search teams would be looking, certainly. But in this weather, in this terrain, their options were limited. Quan had led enough search and rescue operations to know the calculus. Risk versus probability. Resources versus likelihood of success. At some point, probably soon, someone would make the decision that continuing the search posed too great a risk to additional personnel. He did not blame them. It was the right call, tactically, but it meant his survival was entirely his own responsibility now. Quan finished constructing his ground mat and carefully positioned himself on top of it, arranging his body to minimize contact with cold surfaces while staying under the protection of the overhang. The position was not comfortable, but comfort was not the objective. Not dying was the objective. His mind wanted to drift, to replay the fall, or imagine the search efforts, or worry about his parents receiving notification that their son was missing. He redirected that energy into inventory and planning. What he had, what he needed, what he could improvise. The protein bar would give him calories, but he needed to ration it. Probably a third tonight, a third tomorrow morning, save the last third for when he really needed it. The canteen was half full. The creek below would provide water, but he would need to boil it or risk dysentery, and starting a fire in this wet environment with only 4 matches was a risk he could not afford yet. He ran through the survival priorities again. Shelter, water, fire, food, signaling. He had minimal shelter. Water was accessible. Fire was possible, but difficult. Food was 1 protein bar. Signaling would have to wait until the weather cleared enough for helicopters to fly, and by then he needed to be visible and have a way to attract attention. The cold was the immediate enemy. His wet uniform was leaching heat from his body with every passing minute. Kwon unbuttoned his jacket and wrung out as much water as he could, then did the same with his undershirt. The process left him shivering violently, but wet clothing was worse than damp clothing. He redressed quickly and pulled his knees to his chest, trying to conserve body heat. The shivering was good, actually. It meant his core temperature had not dropped too far. When the shivering stopped, that was when hypothermia became critical. Darkness would come in perhaps 3 hours. The temperature would drop further. Kwon needed to make a decision about fire before then, needed to weigh the risk of wasting matches against the risk of spending the night without heat. He closed his eyes and thought about Torres. The thought surprised him, arriving unbidden. But there was logic to it. Torres would not give up easily. She was stubborn in a way that had cost her during Ranger School, but might serve her well now. If anyone on his team would push for continued search efforts, it would be her. Though pushing and succeeding were different things. First Sergeant Brennan would shut down any emotional appeals quickly. The man ran his company by regulations and risk assessments, and both would argue for calling off the search sooner rather than later. Kwon allowed himself a brief moment of bitter amusement. Brennan would probably volunteer to write the eulogy, would craft something appropriate and forgettable about a soldier who had served adequately, if not exceptionally. Would mention dedication and professionalism without noting that he had spent 2 years trying to transfer Kwon to a different unit. The amusement faded quickly. If he died in this ravine, his parents would never understand why. They would receive a folded flag and condolences from officers who had never met their son. They would ask themselves why Daniel had chosen this life, this risk, instead of the safe path they had wanted for him. He did not have a good answer for that question even now. But he was not dead yet. Cold, injured, alone in a ravine with minimal supplies and fading daylight, yes. But not dead. Maya Torres had never been good at following orders she disagreed with. It was a character flaw, according to her first Ranger School instructor. A liability, according to her second. A strength, according to exactly one person. And that person was currently presumed dead in a ravine somewhere in the Cascade Mountains. She sat in her barracks room with the lights off, still wearing her damp uniform, staring at the wall where other soldiers had taped photos and motivational quotes. Her own wall was mostly bare except for a single photograph, creased and faded for being carried through 2 deployments and 3 duty stations. The photo showed a frozen pond at Fort Benning, taken the day after she nearly drowned in it. She had been 19 years old and arrogant in the way that came from growing up in the mountains of Colorado and assuming that made her an expert on winter survival. The ice had looked solid. It had held her weight for perhaps 10 steps before the cracking sound reached her ears, and by then physics had already won the argument. The water had been so cold it felt like being stabbed. She remembered the shock of it driving the air from her lungs, remembered the current pulling her under the ice, remembered the absolute certainty that she was going to die because she had been too stupid to test the ice properly. She also remembered hands grabbing her gear, remembered being dragged back through the hole in the ice, remembered lying on the bank coughing up pond water while someone wrapped her in their jacket and yelled for a medic. That someone had been Private Daniel Kwon, a trainee from another platoon who happened to be running past when she fell through. He had not hesitated, had not waited for permission, had just gone into the water after her like it was the most natural thing in the world. The Army had given him a certificate of achievement. Torres had tried to thank him properly, but Kwon had shrugged it off with the same quiet embarrassment he seemed to apply to any recognition. Just did what anyone would do, he had said. You would have done the same. Maybe, but she had not been the one who actually did it. That memory sat next to the present moment like 2 weights on a scale. Kwon had saved her life without hesitation 8 years ago. Now he needed saving, and the army had decided it was too risky to try. Torres stood up and moved to her wall locker. Her hands found the rucksack by touch in the darkness, began methodically packing supplies. Bivy sack, thermal layers, high-calorie food bars, first aid kit with the good trauma supplies, not the basic issue garbage, headlamp with extra batteries, rope, carabiners. She was violating a direct order. She was risking her career. She was making a choice that every logical part of her brain argued against. But logic had not pulled her out of frozen water 8 years ago. Quan had. The question was not whether she would go. The question was how to do it without getting caught before she had a chance to search properly. Captain Osei had ordered her to rest. He had not technically ordered her to stay on base, though the implication was clear enough. If she left now, in this weather, to search against orders, she would face disciplinary action at minimum. If she stayed and Quan died because she followed orders instead of following her conscience, she would face something worse than disciplinary action. Torres checked her watch. 2,200 hours. Most of the company would be settling in for the night. The CQ desk would have a runner, but the runner would be focused on the main building, not the vehicle lot. If she moved carefully, if she used the weather as cover, she could get to the trail access point before anyone noticed she was gone. She finished packing and pulled on her rain gear. The fabric was still damp from earlier, but it would do. She grabbed her patrol cap, then paused and reached back into her locker for the photo from the wall. She tucked it into her cargo pocket, a reminder of why she was doing this. The hallway was empty, fluorescent lights humming against the silence. Torres moved quickly, but not frantically. Just another soldier heading somewhere with purpose. She took the back stairs, avoided the main entrance, slipped out through the side door near the laundry room that nobody used after 2200. The rain hit her immediately, cold and steady. She pulled up her hood and started walking toward the vehicle lot, keeping to the shadows between buildings. Her truck was parked near the back, away from the streetlights. She had chosen that spot months ago for reasons that had nothing to do with sneaking off base and everything to do with preferring darkness to artificial light. The keys were in her pocket. The truck started on the first try, engine loud in the quiet night. Torres backed out carefully, headlights off until she reached the main road. Nobody stopped her. Nobody called out. The gate guard waved her through without question because she was in uniform and had a valid ID and looked like she belonged. Sometimes the easiest way to break rules was to look like you were following them. The drive to the trail access point took 30 minutes on roads that were slick with rain and littered with fallen branches. Torres kept her speed careful, her attention on the conditions. Getting into an accident would help nobody, least of all Quan. She parked at the closed gate that marked the boundary of the training area. Regulations said the area was off-limits after dark, especially in weather like this. Regulations also said a lot of things that assumed everyone valued their career more than they valued keeping promises to people who saved their lives. Torres shouldered her rucksack and started walking. The trail was barely visible in the darkness, marked more by the absence of trees than by any clear path. Her headlamp cut through the rain in a narrow cone of light that showed about 10 feet ahead and nothing more. She moved carefully, testing each step, mindful of the same wet conditions that had caused Quan to fall. The irony was not lost on her. If she fell, if she got injured or lost, then the army would have 2 missing soldiers instead of 1. Captain Osei would be justified in his anger. Brennan would be vindicated in his assessment that emotion made soldiers stupid. But the alternative was going back to her barracks room and sitting in the dark knowing she had not even tried. The terrain grew steeper as she climbed. The rain turned to sleet, small pellets of ice that stung her face and collected in the folds of her rain gear. The temperature was dropping fast, confirming the weather service predictions. Sub-freezing by midnight, even colder by dawn. If Quan was still alive, he would be fighting hypothermia now. Would be trying to stay dry, stay warm, stay conscious. Would be doing all the things they had trained for in classroom exercises that never quite captured how hard it actually was when your body was shaking and your mind was getting foggy and every instinct screamed at you to just close your eyes and rest. Torres pushed harder, legs burning as she climbed. She had memorized the map before leaving, had studied the ravine system where the search teams believed Quan had fallen. The area was extensive, dozens of possible locations, but she had a theory based on the last known position and the terrain features. Water flowed downhill. Injured people sought shelter. The intersection of those two facts narrowed the possibilities. She reached a ridgeline and paused to check her compass. The ravine system was northeast from here, maybe a mile, through dense forest. In daylight with good weather, it would be a 40-minute hike. In darkness with sleet and uncertain footing, it might take twice that. Torres started moving again, angling downslope toward the sound of running water. Her boots slipped on wet leaves and loose rock. Branches caught at her gear, dumped, collected, rained down her neck when she pushed through them. The cold was working its way through her layers despite the exertion of climbing. She thought about Quan sitting in that frozen pond bank 8 years ago, shivering in his wet uniform after pulling her out. He had refused medical attention, had insisted the medics focus on her, had walked back to the barracks in soaked clothes because he had given her his jacket, stubborn in a quiet way that made it easy to miss unless you paid attention. Torres had been paying attention for 8 years, had watched Quan move through the ranks with steady competence that never demanded recognition, had seen him deflect praise and redirect credit to his team, had noticed how junior soldiers came to him with problems because he listened without judgment and helped without making them feel inadequate, had watched First Sergeant Brennan undervalue him for 2 years because Quan did not fit Brennan's idea of what leadership looked like. The ravine appeared suddenly, a dark gash in the forest floor that her headlamp could not fully illuminate. Torres approached the edge carefully, playing her light across the steep walls and the tangle of vegetation below. The sound of running water echoed up from the darkness, louder than it had seemed from a distance. This was the area, somewhere down there, if the search teams were right about the fall location. If Quan had survived the initial impact, if he had found shelter, if he was still conscious. Too many ifs. Torres cupped her hands around her mouth and shouted into the ravine. "Staff Sergeant Quan." Her voice was swallowed by the sound of rain and rushing water. She tried again, louder. "Quan, it is Torres." Nothing came back except the ambient noise of the storm. She moved along the ridge, calling every 30 seconds, listening for any response. The chances of him hearing her were minimal. The chances of him being able to respond if he did hear were even lower. But doing nothing was not an option she had given herself. After 20 minutes of searching along the ridge, Torres found something that made her stop. A torn piece of fabric caught on a branch, olive drab and rain-soaked, but definitely military issue. She pulled it free and examined it in her headlamp. Standard Army combat uniform material, the kind everyone wore. It could have been from anyone from any time. Could have been there for weeks. But it was the first sign that someone had been here, had passed through this specific location. Torres marked the position on her GPS and began working her way down the slope toward the ravine floor, moving sideways to control her descent, grabbing branches and roots for stability. The slope was treacherous, exactly the kind of terrain that could send someone tumbling if they lost their footing. If Quan had fallen here, had tried to arrest his slide and failed, he could have ended up anywhere in a 100-meter radius. Torres reached the bottom and found herself in a narrow channel carved by water over centuries. Boulders littered the floor, some as large as vehicles. The spaces between them created small caves and overhangs, places where someone might take shelter. She began methodically searching each space, calling Quan's name, listening for responses that did not come. First Sergeant Wade Brennan had been writing eulogies in his head since 0:30, when he should have been sleeping. Dedicated to his soldiers, committed to excellence, a quiet professional who led by example. The words felt hollow even in his thoughts, shaped more by what was appropriate to say than what was actually true. He sat at his desk in the company headquarters, the notepad in front of him still mostly blank except for the phrases he had tried and crossed out. The memorial service was now less than 48 hours away. The base chaplain had called twice asking for talking points. Captain Osei expected something thoughtful and genuine. Genuine was the problem. Brennan could do thoughtful. He could craft sentences that sounded meaningful and respectful. But genuine required knowing the person you were memorializing, and he had to admit, at least to himself, that he had never really known Daniel Kwan. The knock on his door came at 0700 exactly. Corporal Chun stood in the doorway, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. "Permission to speak, First Sergeant." Brennan waved him in. "What is it, Chun?" The corporal stepped inside, but did not sit, standing at parade, rest with his eyes fixed on a point above Brennan's head. "It is about Specialist Torres, First Sergeant. She is not in her barracks. Her roommate says her bunk was not slept in. Her truck is gone from the lot." Brennan felt the first spike of anger, sharp and immediate. When was she last seen? "Last night, around 2200 hours. She left through the side entrance near the laundry. Security footage shows her leaving the base at 22:30. "Of course she did." Brennan stood up, his chair rolling backward. "Of course she went out there." He moved to the window, looking out at the rain that had not stopped since yesterday. The stubborn ones never knew when to accept reality. They just kept pushing until they got themselves or someone else killed. "Should I alert Captain Osei?" Chin asked. Brennan considered it. Protocol said yes. A soldier absent without leave, potentially in danger, definitely in violation of direct orders. The chain of command needed to know immediately. But alerting the captain meant launching another search operation, this time for Torres. It meant pulling resources to find someone who had deliberately put herself in danger. It meant validating her decision to ignore orders by treating her disappearance as an emergency rather than the disciplinary matter it actually was. "Not yet," Brennan said. "Give me 30 minutes. I want to confirm her location first before we turn this into a full incident." Chun hesitated. "With respect, First Sergeant, if she is in the training area in these conditions, 30 minutes could matter. I'm aware of the timeline." "Corporal," Brennan turned from a window, "but I'm also aware that Specialist Torres is a fully qualified infantryman with mountain warfare training who chose to violate orders. If we launch a rescue operation every time someone makes a stupid decision, we will never have time for anything else." The words came out harsher than he intended, sharpened by the frustration that had been building since yesterday. Chin's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes, a judgment being formed and held back by military courtesy. "Dismissed, Corporal. I will handle this." Chun saluted and left, closing the door with careful precision. Brennan returned to his desk and pulled up the security footage on his computer. The timestamp showed 22:28 when Torres's truck passed through the main gate. The guard had waved her through without question because she was in uniform and looked like she had a legitimate reason for leaving. Nobody had thought to ask where a junior enlisted soldier was going at that hour in that weather. He tracked her route using the base access logs. She had not signed out any equipment from the supply room, had not filed a travel plan or requested permission for off-duty training, had simply packed her personal gear and left, headed for the training area. Had to be. Nowhere else made sense given the context. Brennan picked up his phone and dialed the range control office. "This is First Sergeant Brennan, Delta Company. I need to know if anyone accessed the North Training Area gates last night after 2200 hours. The specialist on duty took a moment to check. "Negative, First Sergeant. All gates were secure. No authorized access after 20 hours yesterday." "What about unauthorized access? Any signs of forced entry or vehicles in unauthorized areas?" Another pause. "We have not run morning checks yet, First Sergeant. I can send someone to verify if you need." "Do that. Call me back with confirmation." Brennan ended the call and stared at the notepad on his desk, at the half-written eulogy for a soldier he had undervalued and a blank space where he should be planning what to say about a soldier who might be adding herself to the casualty list. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Kwan had been the cautious one, the NCO who questioned orders when he thought they put soldiers at risk. Torres was the aggressive one, the soldier who pushed limits and ignored warnings. Yet Kwan was the one presumed dead from an accident, and Torres was the one deliberately walking into danger. Maybe they had that in common. Maybe that was what Brennan had failed to see. Both of them valued something more than they valued following the path of least resistance. Quan valued soldier safety over career advancement. Torres valued loyalty over self-preservation. Brennan valued order and discipline, and look where that had gotten him. Writing eulogies at 0700 while his soldiers made decisions he could not control. His phone rang. The range control specialist sounded uncertain. First Sergeant, we found a vehicle at the north access point. Civilian truck registered to a Specialist M. Torres. The gate was not breached, but the truck is definitely there. Time of arrival. Based on engine temperature and rain accumulation, probably 10 to 12 hours ago. Brennan closed his eyes. So she had been out there all night, in sub-freezing temperatures, searching for a man the Army had already declared beyond recovery. Wonderful. Understood. Keep that information restricted for now. I will coordinate response. He ended the call and sat in silence for 30 seconds, working through the options. Report to Captain Osei and launch an official search, which would take hours to organize and would likely result in both Torres and any search team being exposed to the same conditions that had killed Quan. Or drive out there himself, find Torres, and bring her back before this became an official incident that would destroy her career. The smart choice was obvious. Report through proper channels. Let command make the decision. Protect himself from liability. But the smart choice would take time they might not have. Brennan stood up and grabbed his patrol cap and jacket. He stopped at the supply room and checked out cold weather gear, a rescue litter, and a medical kit. The specialist behind the counter gave him a curious look, but knew better than to ask questions. The drive to the north access point took 40 minutes through rain that had turned to freezing precipitation. The roads were getting dangerous, ice forming on bridges and overpasses. Another few hours, and they would be impassable. Torres's truck sat exactly where range control had reported, pulled off to the side near the closed gate. Brennan parked behind it and got out, immediately feeling the bite of wind-driven sleet against his face. He checked the truck bed and found it empty. Checked the cab and found nothing except a gym bag and some paperwork. She had taken all her gear and gone into the training area on foot. In the dark, in conditions that had already killed one soldier and would likely kill anyone who stayed out too long. Brennan shouldered his rucksack and started following the trail, using his headlamp to pick out boot prints in the mud. Torres's prints, based on size and tread pattern, fresh enough that the rain had not completely erased them yet. He had not done a movimento contact patrol in years, had spent most of his recent career behind desks and in planning meetings. His legs protested the pace, his lungs burned in the cold air. But he kept moving, following the trail northeast toward the ravine system. After an hour, he found a first sign that Torres had been searching methodically. Broken branches marked at regular intervals, small cairns of stones placed as navigation markers. She was not just wandering. She had a plan. Brennan kept climbing, his respect for Torres's determination grudgingly increasing despite his anger at her insubordination. This was not a reckless impulse. This was a deliberate operation executed with skill and planning. He reached the ridgeline and saw where she had descended into the ravine. The slope was treacherous, loose rock and wet vegetation. He could see the marks where she had slid, caught herself, controlled her descent. Could see where she had searched along the bottom, methodically checking each boulder formation and overhang. Brennan cupped his hands around his mouth. Torres, this is First Sergeant Brennan. Your position. His voice echoed down the ravine and disappeared into the sound of running water. He tried again, louder. Torres, respond. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, faint but unmistakable, a voice from somewhere below. First Sergeant, I found him. He is alive. The words hit Brennan like a physical force. Alive. Quan was alive. The soldier he had been writing a eulogy for was alive. And Torres, the soldier who had violated orders and risked her career and possibly her life, had found him. Brennan started down the slope, moving as quickly as he dared. His earlier anger at Torres transformed into something more complex, something that included grudging admiration and profound relief and the uncomfortable recognition that she had been right to disobey him. That maybe, just maybe, loyalty and courage sometimes required breaking rules. That maybe he had been wrong about more than just the search operation. Quan had stopped shivering 2 hours ago. He knew what that meant. His body had burned through its reserves trying to generate heat, had exhausted the shivering response, was now shutting down non-essential functions to protect the core. Hypothermia had stages, and he was deep into the dangerous ones. The stages where your brain got fuzzy and your judgment got questionable, and lying down for a rest seemed like a reasonable idea. He had been fighting the urge to sleep for the past hour, using every mental trick he could remember, counting in Cantonese like his mother had taught him as a child, reciting general orders from basic training, inventorying his injuries in obsessive detail, anything to keep his mind engaged and active. The protein bar was gone. He had eaten the last third of it an hour ago, had felt the brief spike of energy that came from calories hitting an empty system. That energy was fading now, leaving him more aware of the cold and the pain and the growing certainty that he had survived the fall only to die slowly from exposure. His shelter was adequate but not sufficient. The overhang kept rain off his head but did nothing about the cold radiating from the rock at his back and seeping up from the ground beneath him. The mat of moss and debris provided minimal insulation. He had tried to improve it throughout the night, but his injured ankle made movement excruciating, and his growing mental fog made complex tasks nearly impossible. The darkness had been absolute until about an hour ago, when the faintest gray light began filtering through the canopy above. Dawn approaching, his second dawn in the ravine. He had survived the night, which was something. Whether he would survive another was a different question. Quan's mind drifted despite his efforts to anchor it. He found himself thinking about his parents' restaurant, the smell of ginger and garlic and soy sauce that had permeated his childhood. His mother in the kitchen moving with practiced efficiency. His father managing the front of house with careful attention to every customer. They had built something solid through decades of work, had created stability and success through sheer determination. They had wanted that same stability for their son. College, professional career, marriage, grandchildren. A predictable path that did not include mountains and combat training and dying alone in a ravine because you slipped on wet ground. He wondered if they would understand when they got the notification, if they would find any meaning in his choice to serve, or if they would just feel the waste of it, the senselessness of a life ending for no purpose in a place that had nothing to do with protecting anyone. The thought made him angry, which was good. Anger was energy. Anger fought back against the creeping acceptance that wanted him to just close his eyes and let the cold win. He shifted position again, sending fresh spikes of pain through his ankle. The joint had swollen so much that his boot felt like a vice. He should probably cut the boot off to relieve pressure, but that would expose his foot to the cold, and he was not sure he could get the boot back on if he needed to move. Always a calculation. Always weighing bad options against worse options. A sound cut through the ambient noise of water and wind. Distant, almost lost in the morning air. A voice calling something he could not make out. Quan went still, listening. His ears were working better than his brain right now, sharper somehow in the way senses compensated when the mind started to fail. He heard it again, clearer this time. Someone calling a name. His name. He tried to respond, but his voice came out as a croak, barely audible even to himself. His throat was raw from the cold air, his vocal cords not cooperating. He swallowed, tried again. Here. The word was stronger, but still not loud enough to carry. The voice called again, closer now. Quan recognized it this time. Torres. Somehow, impossibly, Torres was in the ravine calling for him. He pulled himself forward out of the overhang, ignoring the pain from his ankle and ribs. Used his arms to drag himself toward the sound, moving with desperate urgency, because his addled brain insisted that if he did not reach her now, she would disappear like a hallucination. Torres. His voice was stronger now, powered by adrenaline and hope and the fierce will to survive that had kept him alive through the night. Torres here. He heard the change in her movement, heard her running toward his voice. Then she was there, appearing around a boulder formation with her headlamp cutting through the gray dawn light, and Quan had never been so grateful to see another human being in his entire life. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already moving to check his condition with practiced efficiency. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and cold, her uniform soaked, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Staff Sergeant, can you tell me where you're injured?" "Ankle. Left." Quan's words came in fragments, his brain struggling to organize sentences. "Ribs. Shoulder maybe. Cold. So cold." Torres was already pulling off her rucksack, extracting the bivy sack and thermal blanket. "I know. I'm going to get you warm. Stay with me, Staff Sergeant. Stay awake." She wrapped the thermal blanket around his shoulders and helped him lean back against the boulder, getting him stable before she addressed the other injuries. Her movements were quick but gentle, the kind of efficiency that came from actual medical training rather than just the basic combat lifesaver course everyone took. "How long?" Quan managed. "How long out here?" "You have been missing for 31 hours. Torres pulled out chemical heat packs and activated them, placing them against his core and in his armpits. "The search was called off yesterday afternoon. They think you're dead." "Not dead." The absurdity of having to clarify that almost made him laugh. "Wrote Eulogy yet?" "First Sergeant Brennan was working on it when I left." Torres met his eyes, and something passed between them that did not need words. "You saved my life once, Staff Sergeant. I was not about to let you die in a ravine when I could do something about it." The memory of the frozen pond came back, crystallized by the parallel situation. "You came alone. I came alone." Her jaw set in that stubborn way he remembered from Ranger School. "Against orders. Probably getting court-martialed when we get back. But you are alive, so I will take that trade." Quan felt warmth spreading from the heat packs, felt his mind clearing slightly as his core temperature began to stabilize. Torres had saved his life, had risked her career and possibly her life to search for him when everyone else had given up. The weight of that gesture, the loyalty it represented, was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," he said quietly. The words were insufficient, but they were all he had. Torres was checking his ankle now, her face grim as she assessed the swelling. "This is bad. Definitely broken. We need to get you to medical, but I cannot carry you out alone. The terrain is too rough." "How far to base?" "About 3 miles through mountain terrain." Torres looked up at the ravine walls, calculating. "I can get help, but that means leaving you here while I go back. Or we can wait for First Sergeant Brennan." Quan's foggy brain struggled with that statement. "Brennan is here. He followed me. Should be arriving any minute based on the timeline." Torres allowed herself a small smile. He is not happy about the situation, but he came anyway. As if summoned by the mention of his name, a voice echoed down from the ridgeline above. "Torres, this is First Sergeant Brennan. Your position." Torres cupped her hand around her mouth. "Down here, First Sergeant. I have Staff Sergeant Quan. He is alive and stable." There was a pause, then the sound of someone descending the slope with more speed than caution. Brennan appeared a minute later, breathing hard from exertion, his uniform mud-streaked from the climb down. He stopped short when he saw Quan, his expression cycling through surprise, relief, and something that might have been embarrassment. "Staff Sergeant." Brennan's voice was gruff, professional. "Good to see you are not dead." "Good to not be dead, First Sergeant." Quan managed a weak smile. "Sorry about the eulogy." Brennan actually laughed, short and sharp. It was terrible anyway. He moved closer, dropping his own rucksack and pulling out additional medical supplies. "What is his status, Torres?" "Possible broken left ankle, suspected cracked ribs, mild hypothermia. Exposure for approximately 30 hours. Torres rattled off the assessment. "Core temp is rising with heat packs. He is coherent and responsive. Needs immediate medical evacuation, but stable for transport." Brennan pulled out a satellite phone. "I will call for medevac. Weather is clearing enough for helicopter operations." He paused, looking between Torres and Quan. "You did good work finding him, specialist. We will discuss the insubordination later, but right now, I am just grateful you were stupid enough to come out here." Torres came to attention despite kneeling in the mud. "Thank you, First Sergeant." Brennan made the call, his voice taking on the clipped tone of official communication. This is Delta Company First Sergeant Brennan requesting immediate medical evacuation from Training Area North. Grid coordinates to follow. 1 casualty, priority moderate, broken ankle and exposure injuries. 2nd personnel on scene providing aid. Request extraction for 3 personnel total. He listened for a moment, then responded. Confirmed. Patient is Staff Sergeant Daniel Kwan, previously reported as presumed deceased. Very much alive. Send a bird. Kwan closed his eyes, letting the thermal blanket and the presence of other humans and the knowledge of incoming rescue wash over him. He had survived. Against odds and weather and his own body's attempts to shut down, he had survived. And Torres had found him because she refused to accept that he was gone. Because loyalty meant more to her than orders. Because 8 years ago he had pulled her out of frozen water and she had never forgotten. The helicopter took 45 minutes to arrive. Torres spent that time working methodically through the treatment protocols she had learned during her advanced medical training, the certification she had earned on her own time because the Army only required basic combat lifesaver for her position. She monitored Kwan's core temperature, checked his pupils for signs of brain injury from the fall, assessed his circulation despite the swelling in his ankle. Brennan spent it on the satellite phone, making calls that grew progressively more tense. Torres could hear fragments of the conversations. Captain Osei wanted answers. The battalion commander wanted explanations. Someone in the operations center wanted to know how a soldier declared presumed dead was suddenly alive and waiting for medevac. The easy answer was that they had been wrong about the presumption. The harder answer involved admitting that maybe they had given up too quickly. Kwan drifted in and out of alertness. The heat packs and thermal blanket had stabilized his temperature, but exhaustion and pain were catching up now that rescue was confirmed. Torres kept him talking when he was awake, asking questions that required more than yes or no answers. Tell me about your parents' restaurant, she said at one point. Kwan's eyes focused on her, recognition and memory competing with fatigue. Golden Phoenix, in the Sunset District. They have been there for 38 years. My mother does the cooking. My father manages everything else. What kind of food? Cantonese mostly. Some fusion things they added over the years to attract younger customers. But the core menu is traditional. My grandmother's recipes. Kwan paused, gathering strength. They wanted me to take it over. Wanted me to go to culinary school or business school. Not the Army. Why did you join? Torres asked. She knew the answer from 8 years of casual conversations, but she needed him to keep talking, needed him to stay engaged. Wanted to prove I belonged somewhere. Kwan's voice was quiet, words coming slow. Immigrant kid, always between 2 worlds. Never quite Chinese enough for my grandmother, never quite American enough for school. The Army does not care where your parents came from, just whether you could do the job. You did the job, Torres said firmly. You do the job better than most. Brennan lowered the satellite phone and looked at them. Helicopter is 5 minutes out. They will lower a litter and a medic. Torres, you're going up first with Kwan. I will follow on the second lift. Torres nodded, already organizing the extraction in her mind. She had trained on helicopter medevac procedures, but had never done it in actual field conditions. The ravine would make it tricky, limited space for the aircraft to hover, downdraft from the rotors creating additional hazards. The sound of the approaching helicopter grew from a distant thump to a roar that echoed off the ravine walls. Torres looked up and saw the Black Hawk appear overhead, the pilot fighting wind and terrain to hold position above the narrow channel. The side door opened and a rescue litter began descending on a cable, guided by a flight medic. Brennan moved to catch the litter as it reached ground level, steadying it against the downdraft. The flight medic came down next, rappelling with practiced efficiency. He was a sergeant first class with a medical patch on his shoulder and the calm demeanor of someone who had done this hundreds of times. What do we have? The medic asked, already moving toward Kwan. Torres gave him the rundown, clinical and precise. Staff Sergeant Daniel Kwan, age 32, exposure for approximately 32 hours. Broken left ankle, suspected cracked ribs, mild hypothermia now resolving. Core temp rising, vitals stable, alert and oriented. The medic did his own quick assessment, confirming Torres's evaluation. Good work keeping him warm. Let us get him in the litter. He looked at Quan. Staff Sergeant, we're going to move you now. It is going to hurt, but we will be quick. They transferred Quan to the litter with careful coordination, Torres supporting his injured leg while Brennan and the medic handled his upper body. Quan's face went white with pain, but he did not cry out, just gritted his teeth until they had him secured with straps. The medic signaled to the helicopter and the cable tightened. Torres grabbed hold of the litter's frame as instructed, positioning herself to guide it during the ascent. The ground dropped away beneath them, the ravine walls sliding past as they rose toward the hovering aircraft. The downdraft was worse than she expected, buffeting the litter and making it spin slightly. Torres held on and kept her body positioned to stabilize the movement, focusing on the task rather than the fact that she was dangling 50 feet above rocks and trees. Hands grabbed the litter at the door, pulling them into the helicopter's cargo bay. The crew chief and another medic secured the litter while Torres unclipped and moved aside. Through the open door, she could see Brennan below, already being hooked up for the second lift. The flight medic was starting in 4-line in Quan's arm, working with smooth efficiency despite the vibration of the aircraft. Torres strapped into a seat along the wall and watched him work, watched Quan's face relax slightly as pain medication hit his system. The crew chief brought Brennan aboard and signaled the pilot. The helicopter banked and accelerated, leaving the ravine behind and heading for base. The flight would take maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes, and Quan would be in a proper medical facility instead of dying slowly from exposure. 20 minutes, and Torres would have to face whatever consequences came from her decision to violate orders. She looked at Brennan across the cargo bay. His face was unreadable, professional mask firmly in place. He caught her looking and held her gaze for a moment, then gave a single slight nod. Not approval exactly. Maybe acknowledgement. Maybe respect. The flight medic leaned close to be heard over the engine noise. You the one who found him? Torres nodded. How did you know where to look? I knew him, she said simply. Knew he would look for shelter near water. Knew he would try to make himself visible once daylight came. Knew he was too stubborn to die before someone found him. The medic smiled slightly. You know him pretty well then. He saved my life 8 years ago. Torres looked at Quan, who had his eyes closed but was clearly still awake. I owed him the same effort. Sounds like more than just owing someone, the medic observed. Torres did not respond to that. The nature of her loyalty to Quan was complicated, built on years of watching him be undervalued and overlooked while being one of the best NCOs in the company. Built on gratitude and respect and the recognition of someone who shared her tendency to value people over regulations. The base appeared ahead, the landing pad already prepared with medical personnel waiting. The helicopter touched down with barely a bump, and the crew immediately began transferring Quan to a wheeled gurney. The base medical team took over, rapid questions and efficient movement as they whisked him toward the emergency room. Torres and Brennan climbed out and stood on the tarmac as the helicopter lifted off for its next mission. The sudden silence after the engine noise felt strange, disorienting. Captain Osei was striding toward them across the pad, his expression mixing relief and anger in equal measure. Specialist Torres. First Sergeant. My office. Now. They fell in behind him, neither speaking as they walked across the base. Other soldiers stared as they passed, word having clearly spread about the impossible rescue. Torres ignored the attention, focused on keeping her military bearing despite the exhaustion pulling at her muscles. Captain Osei's office was small and utilitarian, dominated by a desk covered in paperwork and a map of the training areas. He closed the door and turned to face them, arms crossed over his chest. Explain, he said. Just explain to me how we went from writing a eulogy to medevacing a live soldier in less than 12 hours. Brennan spoke first. Specialist Torres disobeyed direct orders to rest and instead conducted an unauthorized solo search operation in the training area. She located Staff Sergeant Quan alive in a ravine approximately 3 miles northeast of the North Access Point. I followed her trail this morning and arrived as she was providing medical aid. We called for immediate medevac and executed successful extraction. Captain Osei looked at Torres. Is that accurate, Specialist? Yes, sir. You disobeyed my direct order. Yes, sir. You put yourself at significant risk. Yes, sir. You violated multiple safety protocols and procedures. Yes, sir. Torres kept her eyes forward, her voice level. And I found Staff Sergeant Quan alive and brought him home. The captain's jaw worked for a moment. His anger was real, but competing with the undeniable fact that Torres had succeeded where the official search had failed. That she had been right when command had been wrong. You understand there will be consequences, he finally said. I understand, sir. You understand I should bring you up on charges for this. I understand, sir. Torres allowed herself to meet his eyes. I will make the same choice again, sir. Brennan cleared his throat. Sir, if I may. Specialist Torres demonstrated exceptional initiative, navigation skills, and medical competence during this operation. While her methods were unorthodox, the results speak for themselves. Staff Sergeant Quan is alive because of her actions. The captain looked between them, weighing options. Finally, he sighed. You're both dismissed. Get cleaned up, get some rest. We will address the administrative aspects later. Right now, I need to go explain to Battalion why our casualty count just decreased by 1. They saluted and left, walking back across the base in silence. When they reached the point where their paths diverged, Brennan stopped. Torres. She turned. First Sergeant. What you did was reckless and insubordinate. His voice was stern, but something else lived underneath it. It was also the bravest thing I have seen in 20 years of service. You honored what it means to be a soldier. To never leave anyone behind. Torres felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Thank you, First Sergeant. Brennan nodded once and walked away, leaving Torres standing alone in the gray morning light, exhausted and cold and facing possible disciplinary action. But Quan was alive. Everything else was just details. Quan woke to fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell of a military hospital. His left leg was elevated and wrapped in a cast from ankle to mid-calf. His ribs were tightly bound, and 4-line fed into his arm, delivering fluids and probably pain medication based on the pleasant fog at the edges of his awareness. Every part of his body ached in different ways, but he was warm and dry and alive. The clock on the wall said 14:30 hours. Afternoon of the same day as the rescue. Assuming he had not lost more time than he thought. The window showed gray sky and rain, the weather that had nearly killed him still present, but no longer a threat. A nurse appeared in the doorway, noticed him awake, and smiled. Welcome back, Staff Sergeant. How are you feeling? Like I fell down a mountain, Quan said. His voice was rough but functional. Which I did. That you did. The nurse moved to check his vitals, professional and efficient. You were very lucky. The doctor said another few hours in those conditions, and we would be having a very different conversation. She adjusted his 4. Your core temperature was borderline critical when you arrived. The hypothermia could have caused permanent damage. But did not. You were young and fit, and apparently very stubborn. She made notes on a tablet. The ankle is fractured in 2 places. You will need surgery tomorrow to set it properly. The ribs are cracked, but will heal on their own. Everything else is bruising and exposure damage that time will fix. Quan processed this information through the medication haze. How long until I'm back to duty? The nurse gave him a look that suggested she had heard this question from too many soldiers. Months, Staff Sergeant. You're looking at surgery, recovery, physical therapy. 6 months minimum before you are cleared for full duty. Probably longer. 6 months felt like an eternity, but it was better than the alternative of never. Quan shifted slightly, testing his range of motion. Has anyone been by to visit? Have your company try to come see you. We're only allowing immediate family and command right now. Your parents are on their way from San Francisco. Should arrive tonight. His parents. Quan closed his eyes briefly. They would be terrified, angry, relieved, disappointed. All the emotions at once in that way. His mother had of feeling everything intensely while his father processed quietly. They would want answers he was not sure he could give. There is a specialist, Torres, who has called 6 times asking about your condition, the nurse added. I told her you were stable, but she seems very concerned. She saved my life, Quan said quietly. She can visit when regulations allow it. I will let her know. The nurse finished her notes. The company commander wants to speak with you when you are up for it. No rush, but he said to inform him when you were awake and coherent. Send him in. Might as well get the official conversations over with. The nurse left and returned 10 minutes later with Captain Osei. The captain looked tired, his uniform showing the strain of the past 2 days. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down heavily. Staff Sergeant Quan, good to see you conscious. Good to be conscious, sir. Captain Osei was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. I owe you an apology. We called off the search too quickly. We made assumptions based on terrain and weather without fully exhausting all possibilities. That was a command failure. Quan considered this. With respect, sir, the conditions were terrible. Continuing the search would have put more people at risk. The decision made tactical sense. Tactical sense does not matter much if we abandon a living soldier. The captain's voice was firm. Torres proved that with better knowledge of your capabilities and determination, we could have found you sooner. Should have found you sooner. Torres violated orders to search for me. She did, and we're still determining what consequences that merits. Captain Osei met Quan's eyes. But between you and me, I'm grateful she did. The alternative would have been delivering a flag to your parents for a death that did not have to happen. The weight of that statement settled between them. Quan thought about Torres out in the ravine all night, searching when everyone else had given up. Thought about the risk she had taken, the career she had potentially damaged, all because she refused to accept that he was gone. Sir, whatever disciplinary action is being considered for Specialist Torres, I would like to submit a statement on her behalf. Noted. The captain made a gesture that suggested the bureaucracy around Torres's actions was complicated and ongoing. There is another matter we need to discuss. First, Sergeant Brennan. Quan waited, uncertain where this was going. He has submitted a request to revise your last evaluation. Said his assessment was incomplete and did not reflect your actual performance or value to the company. Captain Osei pulled out a tablet and pulled up a document. He wants to upgrade your ratings in leadership, tactical competence, and soldier care. He also recommended you for promotion consideration ahead of the normal cycle. Quan stared at the captain, trying to process this information through the medication fog. First Sergeant Brennan wrote that. He did. Submitted it this morning while you were in surgery for the ankle. Included a pretty detailed explanation of how he had undervalued your contributions and allowed personal disagreements to cloud his judgment of your capabilities. Quan did not know what to say. Brennan had spent 2 years trying to transfer him out, had questioned his evaluations, dismissed his concerns, made it clear he did not fit Brennan's vision of what an NCO should be. And now he was recommending promotion and upgrading evaluations. Sir, I do not understand. Captain Osei smiled slightly. I think First Sergeant Brennan had what people call a come-to-Jesus moment. Watching someone disobey orders to save a soldier he was writing a eulogy for tends to make you reconsider your priorities. He paused. He also said something about you being right about a training exercise 8 months ago that resulted in a soldier getting injured. I remember that exercise. Brennan admitted that you voiced legitimate safety concerns and he overruled you for the wrong reasons. Said it had colored his view of you ever since, and that was unprofessional. The captain set down the tablet. People do not change their opinions easily in the military. The fact that he is doing this publicly in official documentation says something significant. It says he feels guilty, Quan said quietly. It says he learned something. Captain Osei stood up. Get some rest, Staff Sergeant. Focus on healing. We will handle the administrative pieces. Your job right now is to recover so you can get back to doing what you do best. What is that, sir? Taking care of soldiers, even when it is not convenient or comfortable or appreciated at the time. The captain moved toward the door, then paused. For what it is worth, I'm glad Torres was stubborn enough to ignore me. And I'm glad you were stubborn enough to survive until she found you. He left, and Quan was alone with his thoughts and the quiet beeping of medical equipment. The door opened again after a few minutes. Quan expected another nurse, or maybe a doctor, but instead Corporal Chun stuck his head in tentatively. "Staff Sergeant, you awake?" "Kumin Chen." The corporal entered, looking uncomfortable in the way junior enlisted always did when visiting senior NCOs in the hospital. He carried a small bag. "The guys wanted me to bring you something." He pulled out a bottle of expensive bourbon for when you're off the pain meds. "And this." He produced a folder. Quan opened it and found himself looking at pages of signatures and short messages. "Get well soon. We need you back. Should have known you were too mean to die." The entire company had signed it, dozens of names and personal notes. His throat tightened unexpectedly. "Tell them thank you." "I will." Chin shifted his weight. "Staff Sergeant, I wanted to say something. When they called off the search, when they said you were gone, it did not feel right. You were always there for us. Always had our backs. It felt wrong to just give up. You did not make that call," Quan said gently. "I know, but I should have done what Torres did. Should have trusted what I knew about you, instead of accepting what command decided." Chin looked down. She was braver than the rest of us. She was also reckless and insubordinate, Quan pointed out. But yes, she was brave. Worth it, though. Chin met his eyes. Having you back is worth whatever trouble she gets in. After Chin left, Quan lay in the quiet room, thinking about loyalty and courage and the distance between what regulations said you should do and what your conscience demanded you do. Torres had chosen conscience over regulations and saved his life. Brennan had chosen to publicly admit his mistakes and revise his judgments. Even Chun was grappling with the guilt of not doing more. The door opened again. This time was Torres. She looked exhausted, her eyes shadowed with lack of sleep. She had changed into a clean uniform, but her hair was still damp from a recent shower. She stood in the doorway as if uncertain whether she was allowed to enter. Quan smiled despite the pain it caused his ribs. "Get in here, specialist." Torres entered and moved to the side of the bed, her military bearing slipping slightly as relief crossed her face. "You look terrible, Staff Sergeant. You should see the other guy." Quan gestured at the chair. "Sit down before you fall down. When did you last sleep?" "I will sleep when I know you are actually going to be okay." Torres sat but perched on the edge of the chair, ready to spring up if needed. "The doctors said the surgery went well. Said you should make a full recovery. That is what they tell me." Quan studied her face. "You went into that ravine alone, in the middle of the night, and whether that could have killed you." "Yes." "You violated direct orders." "Yes." "You risked your career." "Yes." Torres's jaw set stubbornly. "And I would do it again. You saved my life 8 years ago without hesitation. I was not going to let you die when I could search for you." The words hung between them, simple and profound. Quan reached out and Torres took his hand, her grip firm and warm. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not giving up on me." "Never," she replied. "That is not who we are." Quan's parents arrived at 2200 hours, his mother bursting into the hospital room with the force of 38 years of accumulated worry, finally finding an outlet. She spoke in rapid Cantonese, words tumbling over each other too fast for even Quan to fully process. He caught fragments. "Foolish boy. We told you. Could have died. Why do you do this to us?" His father followed more quietly, his face showing the strain of the past day, but his movements controlled. He placed a hand on his wife's shoulder, gently steering her toward the chair beside the bed. She sat but continued her tirade, switching between Cantonese and English as her emotions demanded. 32 years old, and you are still trying to prove something," she said, gripping his hand tightly enough to hurt. "What do you need to prove, Daniel? That you are brave, that you are strong. We already know these things. We do not need you to fall down mountains to show us." "Ma." Quan's voice was gentle. "I did not fall on purpose. It was an accident during training." "Training for what?" His mother's eyes were red from crying. "Training to go somewhere dangerous and get yourself killed for real next time. This is what we worry about. This is why we wanted you to stay home." His father spoke quietly. "Your mother has not slept since we got the call. First they said you were missing. Then they said you were presumed dead. Then suddenly you were alive again. This is very hard for a mother's heart." "I know. I am sorry." Quan looked between them, These two people who had built a life in a new country through sheer determination, who had wanted their son to have stability and safety, who had never understood why he chose a path that offered neither. I did not mean to worry you, but you did worry us. You always worry us. His mother wiped her eyes. When you joined the army, we thought it would be temporary. A few years, and then you would come home, open a restaurant or go to school or do something safe. But 12 years, Daniel. 12 years of us worrying every time the phone rings. His father pulled up another chair. Tell us what happened. From the beginning. Quan walked him through it. The training exercise. The fall. The night in the ravine fighting hypothermia. Torres's search. The rescue. He kept his tone factual, minimizing the danger because that seemed kinder than dwelling on how close he had come to dying. His mother listened with her hand pressed to her mouth. His father's expression grew more grim with each detail. And this woman who found you, his mother said when he finished. This Torres, she disobeyed orders to search for you. Yes. She risked her career. Yes. Why would she do this? Quan hesitated, considering how to explain the bond between soldiers to parents who had never served. Because I saved her life once. Because we take care of each other. Because in the military, you do not leave people behind. His mother's eyes narrowed in that way that meant she was seeing past his words to the truth underneath. You care for this woman. She is a good soldier. A good friend. That is not what I asked. Quan felt heat rise in his face despite the pain medication. Ma, it is not like that. Torres and I are colleagues. We respect each other. Respect does not make someone walk into a mountain in the middle of the night. His mother's voice softened slightly. Love makes someone do that. Or loyalty that is close to love. His father made a small sound that might have been agreement. This Torres, she is in trouble now for disobeying orders. They're still deciding what action to take. And you will speak for her. His father said it as a statement rather than a question. Yes, I owe her my life. His mother squeezed his hand again, gentler this time. We owe her your life. When she is allowed visitors, I would like to thank her myself. The conversation shifted then, moving into the safer territory of his recovery timeline and what would happen next. Surgery had gone well. Physical therapy would start in a few days. Eventually, he would transfer to a medical hold status until cleared for duty. His mother wanted him to come home to San Francisco during recovery. His father suggested maybe it was time to consider other options, safer career paths. Quan listened and deflected and avoided making promises he knew he would not keep. They stayed until nearly midnight when the nurses finally insisted visiting hours were over. His mother kissed his forehead and made him promise to call every day. His father gripped his shoulder with wordless intensity that conveyed more than sentences could. When they were gone, Quan lay in the darkness thinking about duty and family and the impossible task of honoring both. His parents had sacrificed everything to build a new life in America. They had worked brutal hours in the restaurant, had saved every penny, had invested everything in their son's future. And that son had chosen the military instead of the path they envisioned. He understood their disappointment, even if he could not change his choices. The door opened quietly and Brennan stepped inside, moving with the careful silence of someone checking on soldiers after lights out. He stopped when he saw Quan was awake. Did not mean to disturb you, Staff Sergeant. You are not disturbing me, First Sergeant. Cannot sleep anyway. Brennan moved closer, his face shadowed in the dim light from the hallway. Saw your parents leaving. They looked upset. They are worried. They do not understand why I serve. Do you understand why you serve? It was an honest question, not a challenge. Quan considered it, because I wanted to belong somewhere. Because I wanted to prove I was more than just the immigrant kid trying to fit in. Because I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. And did you find that? Belonging. Sometimes. Quan met Brennan's eyes. Not always. Sometimes I felt like I was proving myself over and over without ever quite succeeding. Brennan was quiet for a long moment. I made that harder than it should have been. Made you feel like you had to constantly justify your place in the company. That was wrong. You had your reasons. Bad reasons. Brennan's voice was rough with something that might have been shame. You questioned my judgment on that training exercise. You were right to question it. A soldier got hurt because I was too stubborn to listen. And instead of acknowledging that, I held it against you. Made your professional life harder because my ego was bruised. People make mistakes, First Sergeant. That was more than a mistake. That was 2 years of letting personal feelings interfere with my duty as your senior NCO. Brennan crossed his arms. I wrote a eulogy for you. Sat at my desk, trying to find something genuine to say about a soldier I had spent 2 years undervaluing. And all I could think about was what a waste it would be. Not just your death, but the fact that I never really saw who you were until it was too late. But it was not too late, Quan said quietly. No, Torres made sure of that. Brennan's expression shifted. She saw what I missed. Saw that you were worth risking everything for. And she was right. The words carried weight, an acknowledgement that went beyond professional courtesy into something more personal. Quan felt the knot of tension he had carried for 2 years begin to loosen slightly. The revised evaluation, Quan said. The promotion recommendation. You did not have to do that. Yes, I did. Brennan's voice was firm. I had to correct the record. Had to make sure everyone knew that my previous assessments were flawed. You are an excellent NCO, Quan. You care about your soldiers, you think tactically, and you have the moral courage to speak up when something is wrong. Those are qualities we should be promoting, not punishing. Thank you, First Sergeant. Brennan nodded once, then straightened. Get some rest. We will need you back when you are healed. The company runs better when you are part of it. He left as quietly as he had entered, and Quan was alone again with his thoughts. The next morning brought more visitors. Soldiers from his platoon stopping by between duties, bringing magazines and snacks and stories from the company. Lieutenant Vance came by looking sheepish, admitting he had relied on Quan's quiet guidance more than he had realized. The chaplain visited, offering spiritual support that Quan politely declined, but appreciated nonetheless. Torres came by during the afternoon, this time officially allowed as visiting hours expanded. She brought a deck of cards, and they played gin rummy while she caught him up on company gossip. Captain Osei had held a formation to address what happened. Had used it as a teaching moment about loyalty and courage and the difference between following orders blindly and understanding the spirit of what those orders were meant to protect. Brennan spoke at the formation too, Torres said, discarding a 7 of hearts. Told the whole company that he had been wrong about you, that he had let personal conflict cloud his professional judgment, that everyone should learn from his mistake. That must have been hard for him to say publicly. Torres smiled slightly. He looked like he was chewing glass, but he said it anyway. I think he meant it. They played in comfortable silence for a while, the cards snapping against the bedside table. Finally, Torres set down her hand. Captain Osei made his decision about my disciplinary action. Quan looked up, and letter of reprimand in my permanent file. No reduction in rank, no loss of pay. He said my actions were insubordinate, but the results made it impossible to punish more severely. Torres's expression was complicated. He also said privately that he wished more soldiers had my initiative, but that I should learn to work within the system instead of around it. That seems fair. It is more than fair. I violated direct orders. Could have been court-martialed. Torres met his eyes. Your statement helped. Captain Osei said you wrote 3 pages about my skills and judgment and loyalty. Said no NCO had ever advocated that strongly for one of their soldiers. You saved my life. The least I could do was help protect your career. Torres reached across the space between them and took his hand again. We are even now. No more life debts between us. Quan smiled. Does that mean you will stop doing reckless things? Only if you stop falling down mountains. Fair enough. 3 weeks after the rescue, Quan was cleared to attend the company formation from a wheelchair. The morning was cold but clear, the first truly sunny day after weeks of rain. The entire company stood in formation on the parade field, over 200 soldiers in precise ranks. Quan sat to the side with Torres standing beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. Captain Osei stood at the front with First Sergeant Brennan beside him. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Price, had come for the occasion. This was unusual enough that the soldiers knew something significant was happening. Company, attention. Brennan's voice carried across the field. The formation snapped to with unified precision. Lieutenant Colonel Price stepped forward. At ease. The formation relaxed slightly, but remained focused. I am here today to recognize extraordinary actions by members of this company. Actions that exemplify the Army values we claim to uphold, but do not always demonstrate when it matters most. He gestured toward Quan and Torres. 3 weeks ago, Staff Sergeant Daniel Quan was involved in a training accident that left him stranded in harsh terrain with serious injuries. The official search was called off after 19 hours due to weather conditions and terrain obstacles. By all reasonable assessments, Staff Sergeant Quan should have died from exposure. The formation was silent, every soldier knowing this story but hearing it laid out in official terms for the first time. He did not die because Specialist Maya Torres refused to accept that assessment. Lieutenant Colonel Price's voice was firm. Acting on her own initiative and against direct orders, Specialist Torres conducted a solo search operation through the night in sub-freezing conditions. She located Staff Sergeant Quan after he had been exposed for more than 30 hours, provided immediate medical aid, and called for evacuation that saved his life. The colonel paused. What Specialist Torres did was technically insubordinate. It violated safety protocols. It put her at significant risk. It was also one of the most courageous acts I have witnessed in 26 years of service. He turned to Torres. Specialist Torres, front and center. Torres released Quan's shoulder and marched forward, coming to attention before the colonel. Her face was controlled, but Quan could see the tension in her shoulders. The Army has a complicated relationship with initiative, Lieutenant Colonel Price said. We train soldiers to follow orders, to work within the chain of command, to value discipline and structure. These are important qualities, but we also need soldiers who understand that rules exist to protect people, not to replace judgment. We need soldiers who know when the spirit of the law matters more than the letter of the law. He produced a medal case from his pocket. For your actions in locating and rendering aid to Staff Sergeant Quan, demonstrating exceptional courage and initiative beyond the call of duty, I am awarding you the Soldier's Medal for heroism not involving actual conflict with an enemy. The formation erupted in applause, regulations about silence during formations temporarily forgotten. Torres's eyes widened in genuine shock as the colonel pinned the medal to her uniform. The Soldier's Medal was the highest award for non-combat heroism, rarely given and deeply respected. Well done, Specialist. The colonel stepped back and saluted. Torres returned the salute, her hand shaking slightly. There is one more recognition. Lieutenant Colonel Price turned toward Quan. Staff Sergeant Quan, I understand you cannot stand, but I ask you to come forward as you are able. Torres moved to push his wheelchair, but Quan waved her off. He had been practicing with crutches for the past week, determined not to be completely helpless. He leveraged himself up awkwardly, settled the crutches under his arms, and made his way forward with careful, limping steps. The formation watched in silence as he covered the 20 feet to where the colonel stood. It took longer than it should have, but Quan refused to be wheeled like cargo. He arrived slightly out of breath and positioned himself as close to attention as his injuries allowed. Staff Sergeant Quan, your survival in extreme conditions for over 30 hours demonstrates remarkable resilience and application of survival training. Lieutenant Colonel Price's voice carried approval. But what I want to recognize is something else. Multiple soldiers have come forward to describe how you have mentored them, advocated for them, and put their welfare ahead of your own advancement. That is the mark of a true leader. The colonel produced another medal case. For sustained superior performance and selfless service to your soldiers, I am awarding you the Army Commendation Medal. Additionally, your promotion to Sergeant First Class has been approved ahead of the normal cycle. Congratulations. Brennan stepped forward with a new rank insignia, his face showing genuine pride as he removed Quan's old rank and pinned on the new one. The medal felt heavier than it should, weighted with meaning beyond the physical object. The formation applauded again, and this time Quan saw familiar faces grinning at him. Corporal Chun, Lieutenant Vance, a dozen other soldiers he had worked with over the years. People who had seen him as just a quiet NCO doing his job, now seeing him recognized for exactly that quality. There is one final matter. Captain Osei stepped forward, holding a folder. The original training exercise that resulted in Staff Sergeant Kwan's accident has been reviewed by the Safety Board. Their findings indicate that several protocols were not followed and that concerns raised prior to the exercise were not adequately addressed. Kwan glanced at Brennan, who was staring straight ahead with carefully neutral expression. As a result, Captain Osei continued. New training protocols have been implemented across the battalion. All future exercises in similar terrain will require enhanced safety measures, better communication systems, and mandatory review of any concerns raised by NCOs or junior officers. These changes will be known as the Kwan Protocol. The weight of having safety regulations named after him hit Kwan harder than medals. This meant that other soldiers in future training cycles would have protections he had not had, that his accident might prevent someone else from experiencing the same thing. "Thank you, sir," he managed. The formation was dismissed, and soldiers immediately swarmed toward Kwan and Torres, offering congratulations and recounting their own versions of the story. Kwan accepted the attention with his usual discomfort, deflecting praise and redirecting credit to Torres and the rescue crew. His parents appeared at the edge of the crowd, having been invited to attend by Captain Osei. His mother was crying again, but this time the tears seemed different. Proud maybe, or at least more understanding. She pushed through to him and gripped his hands. "Your father and I have been talking. About why you serve. About what it means to you. Ma, you do not have to understand. But we want to." His father joined them. "We may never fully understand, but we can see that this matters to you. That these people matter to you. That you have built something here that is real and important." His mother touched the new rank on his collar. "Sergeant First Class Kwan. This is a good thing, yes. An honor. It is an honor, Ma. Then we are proud, even if we are also still worried." She smiled through her tears. "We will always be worried. That is what parents do." Torres approached, and Kwan's mother immediately pulled her into a hug that startled the younger soldier. "Thank you," she said fiercely. "Thank you for bringing my son back." Torres returned the hug, awkwardly. "Just doing what he would have done for me, ma'am." His mother pulled back and studied Torres's face with the intense scrutiny only mothers could achieve. "You are a good soldier, a good friend to my Daniel." "Yes, ma'am. Maybe more than friend someday." His mother's eyes sparkled with something between hope and meddling. "Ma," Kwan's face heated. "Please do not. I'm just saying, a mother can hope." She patted Torres's cheek and moved back to his father, leaving Torres looking equally embarrassed. "Sorry about that," Kwan said. "My mother thinks everyone should be married with 3 children by age 30. Torres laughed. "My mother is the same way. Maybe we should introduce them and let them plan our lives together." The joke hung in the air for a moment, becoming less of a joke and more of an acknowledgement of something neither of them had quite named yet. The bond between them had deepened through the rescue, had become something more complex than just professional respect or even friendship. Kwan cleared his throat. "We should probably talk about that at some point." "Probably." Torres' smile was soft. "But maybe after you can walk without crutches. Romance is hard enough without navigating around medical equipment." "Fair point." Brennan approached, having waited for the crowd to thin. He looked between them with an expression that might have been knowing. "Sergeant First Class Kwan. Still sounds strange to say. Strange to hear, First Sergeant. Get used to it. You have earned it." Brennan's voice was gruff but sincere. "And for what it is worth, I am glad I was wrong about you. Glad Torres proved me wrong by finding you. Glad the whole situation made me reconsider a lot of assumptions I had been carrying." "We all make assumptions," Kwan said. "The important thing is being willing to change them when we learn better." Brennan nodded slowly. That is leadership right there, knowing when to adapt. He glanced at Torres. "Both of you demonstrated that. Different ways, but the same principle. Doing what is right even when it is not easy or comfortable or approved by everyone else." He saluted them both and walked away, leaving Kwan and Torres standing in the autumn sunlight with new medals on their chests and new understanding between them. The company began to disperse, soldiers heading back to their duties. Kwan's parents waited patiently at a distance, giving him time with his fellow soldiers. The battalion commander had already departed for his next obligation. Torres helped Kwan settle back into his wheelchair, her hands gentle on his shoulders. That was intense. That was validation. Kwan looked up at her. For both of us, recognition that doing the hard thing, the right thing, matters even when it breaks the rules. Especially when it breaks the rules, Torres corrected. The rules are important, but people are more important. She pushed his wheelchair toward where his parents waited, and Kwan felt something settle inside him. A sense of belonging that had always been just out of reach, finally solidifying into certainty. He belonged here, with these soldiers, with this purpose, and maybe, eventually, with the woman who had refused to let him die alone in a ravine. 2 months after the ceremony, Kwan walked without crutches for the first time. The physical therapy room at the base medical facility had become his second home, a space filled with exercise equipment and the determined grunts of soldiers rebuilding broken bodies. His therapist, a cheerful captain named Rodriguez, had pushed him relentlessly through the recovery process with a combination of encouragement and refusal to accept excuses. 10 steps, she said, standing ready to catch him if he fell. From here to the parallel bars. No crutches, no cane, just you and that rebuilt ankle. Kwan positioned himself carefully, testing his weight distribution. The ankle still ached, probably always would to some degree, but the bone had healed and the surgical pins had done their job. He took the first step, feeling the strange combination of weakness and stability in the joint. Good. Keep going. Rodriguez moved alongside him, hands ready but not touching. The rebuilt muscles in his leg trembled with effort but held. He took another step, then another, finding a rhythm that worked despite the lingering stiffness. 10 steps later, he reached the bars and gripped them with both hands, breathing hard from exertion that would have been trivial before the injury. But he had made it. 10 steps unassisted. Outstanding. Rodriguez made notes on her tablet. We will build from here. Next week we start working on stairs and uneven terrain. The week after that, light jogging if the ankle holds up. When can I return to full duty? She gave him a look that suggested she had heard this question too many times. You're looking at another 2 months minimum before you're cleared for field exercises. For months before you can do anything that involves extended movement with a rucksack. Your ankle will never be what it was, Sergeant First Class. We are aiming for functional, not perfect. Functional is enough. We will see. Rodriguez helped him to a chair. The medical board will make the final determination. There's a possibility you may be permanently profiled for certain activities. No airborne operations, probably no air assault, definitely no long-distance ruck marches for a while. The reality of permanent limitations settled over Kwan like weight. His career would continue, but it would be different, shaped by what his body could no longer do reliably. Some doors had closed the moment he fell down that ravine, but he was alive to face those limitations. That counted for something. Torres was waiting outside the physical therapy room when he emerged. She had taken to timing her visits to coincide with his sessions, claimed it was coincidence, but they both knew better. She smiled when she saw him walking without assistance. Look at you, all fancy and bipedal. Modern medicine is amazing. Kwan settled into the wheelchair he still needed for longer distances, his leg already fatiguing from the brief walk. What brings you by? Lunch. She held up a bag from the food court. Also news. Good news or bad news. Depends on your perspective. Torres pushed his wheelchair toward the cafeteria, navigating the hallways with practiced ease. I got orders. Transferring to Fort Bragg in 6 weeks for advanced leadership training. The announcement hit harder than Kwan expected. Fort Bragg was across the country in North Carolina. Advanced leadership training meant she was being groomed for promotion and more responsibility. It was excellent for her career and terrible for the thing that had been growing between them over the past 2 months. That is fantastic, he said, meaning it despite the disappointment. You have earned it. Have I? Torres's voice was carefully neutral. Or is command trying to separate us before whatever this is becomes a problem? This being what exactly? You know what? Torres parked his wheelchair at a table and sat down across from him, meeting his eyes directly. We have been dancing around it for weeks. The late-night conversations. The way you look at me when you think I am not paying attention. The way I rearrange my schedule to see you every day. Quan felt heat rise in his face. We work in the same company. We are friends. That is not against regulations. Friends do not feel like this. Torres leaned forward. I saved your life. You advocated for my career. We have been through something intense together. And now, there is something between us that goes beyond professional respect or even friendship. And we both know it. The honesty in her words demanded equal honesty in return. You are right. There is something between us. Something I have been trying not to acknowledge, because you are junior in rank and we serve in the same unit, and there are regulations about fraternization. Regulations we could navigate if we wanted to. Torres's expression was intent. People date across rank gaps all the time. They just have to be careful about it. Have to maintain professional boundaries in public. Have to avoid any appearance of favoritism. And what happens when one of us gets promoted again? When the rank gap becomes even wider? When I am in a position to directly influence your career? Quan shook his head. I will not put you in that position. Will not make your advancement dependent on navigating a relationship with me. So your solution is to just ignore what we both feel. My solution is to be realistic about the complications. Quan kept his voice gentle. You're going to Fort Bragg for 6 months. That is good distance, good time to get perspective. Maybe when you come back, we can reassess the situation. Torres sat back, frustration evident on her face. Or maybe when I come back, you will have found another reason why it is too complicated. Another regulation to hide behind. That is not fair, is it not? Torres's eyes flashed. I walked into a mountain in the middle of the night for you. I risked my career, my life, everything because I could not accept losing you. And now you are sitting here telling me we should be realistic about complications. The words hit like accusations, and Quan had no good defense. She was right. He was using regulations and professionalism as shields against the vulnerability of acknowledging what he felt. I'm scared, he admitted quietly. Scared of messing this up. Scared of letting personal feelings compromise professional judgment. Scared of hurting you or damaging your career because I could not maintain appropriate boundaries. So you would rather hurt me now by pushing me away. Torres's voice softened slightly. That is not protection, Daniel. That is cowardice. The use of his first name, something she rarely did, made the statement even more pointed. Quan looked at her across the table. This woman who had saved his life and challenged his assumptions and refused to accept his carefully constructed walls. What do you want from me? He asked. I want you to be honest. Torres reached across the table and took his hand. I want you to stop hiding behind regulations and admit that you care about me the same way I care about you. I want you to take the risk instead of playing it safe. And then what? I care about you, Maya. I care about you more than is probably wise or professional. But caring is not enough when the system is designed to punish relationships between different ranks. Then we deal with the system. Torres's grip tightened. We follow the rules where we can, and we are careful where we have to be. We make it work because it is worth the effort. But we do not just give up before we even try. Quan wanted to argue, wanted to list all the ways this could go wrong. But looking at her face, seeing the determination and hope and frustration mixed together, he found he could not bring himself to shut this down completely. 6 months, he said finally. You go to Fort Bragg, you focus on your training, you make the most of this opportunity without worrying about us. When you come back, if you still feel the same way, we figure out how to make it work within regulations. And what about you? What will you be doing for 6 months? Physical therapy, getting back to full duty if the medical board allows it, figuring out what my career looks like with permanent limitations. Quan met her eyes, and missing you probably, but that is better than rushing into something we have not thought through and damaging both our careers. Torres was quiet for a moment, weighing his words. That is the most emotionally honest thing you have ever said to me. I am working on it. She smiled despite the frustration still evident in her expression. 6 months. But you have to promise me something. What? Write to me. Actually write, not just official emails. Tell me about your recovery, about the company, about what you were thinking. Torres squeezed his hand once more before releasing it. I spent a night in a ravine searching for you. The least you can do is stay in touch while I am gone. I can do that. And when I come back, no more hiding behind regulations unless you genuinely do not want to pursue this. If the only reason is fear of complications, we find a way to navigate the complications. Deal. Quan extended his hand, and they shook on it formally. The gesture somehow more binding than a kiss would have been. Deal. They lunched together, conversation shifting to safer topics. Company gossip, Torres's upcoming training schedule, physical therapy milestones, the comfortable dynamic they had built over months of recovery and visits. But underneath the casual conversation, something had shifted. They had acknowledged what existed between them, had put parameters around it, had committed to seeing where it might lead, despite the obstacles. Later, after Torres had left and Quan was alone in his room, he pulled out paper and a pen. He had not written an actual letter in years, everything done through email and text messages. But Torres had asked for letters, and letters required a different kind of honesty. He started writing, words coming slowly at first, then flowing faster. About the accident, about lying in that ravine, thinking he would die, about hearing her voice calling his name and believing for a moment it was a hallucination, about the gratitude and respect that had slowly transformed into something deeper over weeks of recovery. The letter grew longer than he intended, pages of thoughts he had never spoken aloud. When he finished, it was nearly midnight, and his hand ached from writing. He sealed the letter in an envelope and addressed it to her barracks room. She would get it before she left for Fort Bragg, would know that he meant what he said about staying in touch, would know that 6 months was not goodbye, just a pause while they both figured out who they were separately before trying to figure out who they might be together. 6 months passed like water over stone, slowly reshaping everything it touched. Quan returned to full duty with permanent limitations noted in his medical file. No airborne operations. No prolonged ruck marches over mountainous terrain. Limited to duty positions that did not require those physical capabilities. The restrictions effectively ended certain career paths, but opened others. Captain Osei offered him a position as the company operations sergeant, a role that utilized his tactical knowledge and leadership skills without requiring the physical capabilities he had lost. Quan accepted, finding unexpected satisfaction in the planning and coordination work that he had previously considered desk-bound tedium. Brennan had been promoted and transferred to battalion, replaced by a new first sergeant who actually listened when Quan raised concerns. The dynamic in the company shifted, became more collaborative and less hierarchical. Soldiers came to Quan with problems knowing he would help without judgment. He wrote to Torres every week, long letters that covered everything from recovery milestones to philosophical debates about leadership. She wrote back with equal frequency, her letters detailing the challenges of advanced training and her growing confidence as a leader. They did not discuss feelings directly in the letters. That conversation was saved for phone calls every Sunday evening, carefully timed to when they both had privacy. In those conversations, they were honest about the attraction that had not faded with distance, about the complications they would face when she returned, about the hope that maybe those complications could be navigated. His parents visited twice more, bringing food from the restaurant and slowly coming to terms with their son's chosen path. His mother still worried constantly, but had stopped asking when he would leave the army. His father had started asking about his work with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. The company changed around him. New soldiers arrived, older ones transferred. Lieutenant Vance became Captain Vance, took command of another company. Corporal Chun made sergeant. The rhythm of military life continued, deployments and training cycles, and the constant evolution of people and positions. And then, on a cold morning in March, Torres came back. Quan saw her truck pull into the parking lot from his office window. She had arrived a day earlier than expected, probably driving through the night to get here. He watched her get out, Watched her stretch after the long drive. Watched her look toward the headquarters building as if debating whether to come straight here or check in at her barracks first. She chose the headquarters building. Quan met her at the entrance, suddenly uncertain how to greet someone who was both a fellow soldier and something more. Torres solved the problem by saluting formally, her face professionally neutral despite the smile in her eyes. "Sergeant First Class Quan," she said. "Permission to report back to the company." "Granted, Specialist Torres. Welcome home." They maintained proper distance and formal bearing as they walked to Captain Osei's office for her official check-in. The captain welcomed her back, discussed her new assignment as a team leader, went through the administrative requirements. Torres handled it all with the confidence of someone who had spent 6 months being forged into a better leader. When the official business was done, Captain Osei dismissed them both. He looked between them with an expression that suggested he knew exactly what was happening, but chose to say nothing directly about it. Quan walked Torres to her barracks, carrying one of her bags despite her protests. They did not speak about anything important, just logistics and small talk that filled the space while they figure out how to be around each other again. At her barracks door, Torres turned to face him. "I got your letters. All 26 of them. I got yours. 28 if we are counting." She smiled. Overachiever. Her expression sobered. 6 months did not change anything, Daniel. I still feel the same way. So do I, Quan admitted. Which means we need to figure out how to do this properly. By regulations. Torres nodded. I talked to a JAG officer at Bragg. Confidentially. Asked about fraternization policies for our situation. And what did they say? They said as long as we are not in the same direct chain of command, and there is no appearance of favoritism or abuse of position, relationships between NCOs of different ranks are not prohibited. Torres pulled out a folder from her bag. I also requested a transfer to a different platoon within the company. Put in the paperwork before I left Bragg. It was approved yesterday. You transferred platoons. Different chain of command. You work at company level, I am at platoon level. No direct supervisory relationship. Torres met his eyes. I told you I was not giving up on this. The care she had put into navigating the regulations, into creating a situation where they could pursue this without violating professional standards, touched him more deeply than grand gestures would have. "Dinner tonight," he said. "Off base. Somewhere we can talk without worrying about who sees us." I would like that. They had dinner at a small restaurant in town. Nothing fancy, but private enough for honest conversation. Over mediocre pasta and decent wine, they talked about what 6 months apart had taught them. Quan spoke about learning to accept his limitations, about finding satisfaction in different aspects of his work, about realizing that his worth was not tied to his physical capabilities. Torres talked about discovering her own leadership style, about the confidence that came from proving she could excel without constant validation, about understanding that strength and vulnerability were not opposites. "I'm not the same person who went into that ravine," Quan said. "The accident changed me. The recovery changed me more." "Good," Torres replied. "I did not fall for who you were. I fell for who you are becoming." They dated carefully over the following weeks, maintaining absolute professionalism at work and allowing themselves to be more open off-duty. They were honest with their respective chain of command about the relationship, documented everything properly, and made sure there was never any question of impropriety. Some soldiers gossiped. Most did not care. Captain Osei called them both in once to ensure they understood the boundaries and expectations, then gave his unofficial blessing by inviting them both to his family barbecue. Brennan, now working at battalion, heard about the relationship and called Quan into his office. Quan expected disapproval, got something closer to satisfaction instead. "You two earned this," Brennan said simply. "You both nearly died for each other. If anyone has the right to navigate the complications, it is you." 3 months after Torres returned, Quan invited her to meet his parents properly, not as the soldier who saved their son, but as the woman he was building a future with. His mother immediately adopted Torres, dragged her into the kitchen to teach her family recipes, and extracted her entire life story over dumplings. His father was more reserved, but approved in his quiet way. "She is strong," he told Quan later. "Not just physically. Here, He tapped his chest. Strong where it matters. Like you, Torres brought Quan to Colorado to meet her family, a boisterous clan of ranchers who immediately tested whether he could keep up with their mountain hiking despite his ankle limitations. He impressed them by being honest about what he could not do while finding creative ways to accomplish what he could. Her father, a retired Marine, gave his approval by offering Quan his grandfather's knife. The relationship deepened naturally, built on the foundation of trust and respect they had established through crisis. They moved in together after a year, a small apartment off base that Torres filled with plants and Quan filled with books. They learned each other's habits and rhythms, learned how to fight fairly and apologize sincerely, learned that love was as much about choosing someone every day as it was about grand romantic gestures. Quan's career continued to evolve. He was promoted to Master Sergeant, took over as the Senior Operations NCO for the battalion. Torres made Staff Sergeant, then Sergeant First Class, establishing herself as one of the most competent platoon sergeants in the company. They deployed together once, different units, but same location, maintained their professionalism in theater while supporting each other through the stress and separation. Came home stronger for having faced that challenge together. His parents' restaurant thrived. Torres learned to cook Cantonese food well enough that his mother grudgingly admitted she had potential. Quan learned that sometimes the family you build is as important as the family you are born into, and that both deserved equal honor. The company changed leadership again. New faces, new challenges, new soldiers who heard the story of the staff sergeant who survived and the specialist who refused to give up, but did not fully understand what it meant until they faced their own moments of crisis. Quan and Torres became the example others pointed to, not just of courage or loyalty, but of what it meant to truly take care of each other, to value people over regulations when it mattered, to understand that sometimes the right thing and the easy thing were different, and character was defined by which one you chose. On the anniversary of the rescue, they hiked to a ridgeline near the training area. Not the same one. Quan's ankle would not handle that terrain, but close enough. They stood looking out over the mountains where he had nearly died, and she had refused to accept his death. I think about that night a lot, Torres said quietly, about how close we came to never having this. I think about it too. Quan took her hand, about how one accident, one fall, led to everything that came after, the pain and the recovery and finding you again in a different way. No regrets. About falling down the mountain, many regrets. About everything that happened after. She squeezed his hand. None at all. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over terrain that had tried to kill him and failed. Watching light paint the ridgelines gold and understanding that sometimes the worst moments of your life led directly to the best ones. That survival was about more than just not dying. It was about finding reasons to live that made the struggle worthwhile. And that love, real love, was worth navigating every regulation and complication the world could throw at it. 5 years after the accident, Quan stood on a different ridgeline entirely. This one was in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, on land that belonged to Torres's family. The view stretched for miles, peaks and valleys painted in the golden light of late afternoon. Behind him, chairs were arranged in neat rows facing a simple wooden arch decorated with wildflowers. Ahead, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. His ankle ached slightly from the climb, a permanent reminder that some wounds never fully healed. But he had made the hike without assistance, had proven to himself and everyone watching that limitations were just parameters to work within, not barriers to stop at. Corporal Chun, now Sergeant First Class Chun, stood beside him as best man. Captain Osei, now Major Osei, would officiate the ceremony. Brennan had flown in from his new posting in Germany, sitting in the front row with Quan's parents and Torres's boisterous family. The guests were a mix of military and civilian, soldiers who had served with them and family members who had watched their relationship develop. Everyone who mattered was here on this mountain to witness what came next. Music started, something acoustic and simple. The guests stood and turned toward the trail. Torres appeared at the top of the path, walking beside her father. She wore a simple white dress that somehow looked perfect against the mountain backdrop, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the tight bun regulations required. She was stunning in a way that had nothing to do with the dress and everything to do with the confidence and joy radiating from her. Quan felt his throat tighten as she walked toward him. 5 years ago, she had walked into a ravine in the dark to find him when everyone else had given up. Today, she was walking toward a future they would build together, and somehow that felt like an even braver choice. She reached the arch, and her father shook Quan's hand with a grip that still tested his strength. "Take care of my daughter," the old Marine said quietly. "She is strong, but she chose you to be stronger with." "I will, sir." Every day. Torres's father stepped back, and she took Quan's hands, her smile bright enough to compete with the sunset. Major Osei cleared his throat and addressed the assembled guests. "We are gathered on this mountain to witness the marriage of Master Sergeant Daniel Quan and Sergeant First Class Maya Torres. I have had the privilege of serving with both of them, of watching them grow as leaders and as people. Their story is one of courage, loyalty, and the kind of love that earns the right to exist through action rather than just words." He turned to them. "Daniel and Maya have chosen to write their own vows. Daniel, you may begin." Quan took a breath, centering himself the way he did before any important mission. "Maya, 5 years ago you saved my life by refusing to accept that I was gone. You walked into dangerous terrain in terrible conditions because loyalty meant more to you than safety. But what you did after that mattered even more. You challenged me to be honest about my feelings. You navigated every complication and regulation to make this possible. You loved me through recovery and limitation and the slow process of becoming someone worth building a life with." His voice was steady despite the emotion pressing against his chest. "I promise to honor that courage by being equally brave in how I love you. I promise to never hide behind rules or fear when honesty is required. I promise to be your partner in every sense, to support your dreams the way you supported my recovery, to choose you every day the way you chose to search for me that night. I promise that no matter what mountains we face together, literal or metaphorical, we face them as a team." Torres was crying, quiet tears that she made no attempt to hide. She squeezed his hands and began her own vows. "Daniel, when I went into that ravine, I was looking for the soldier who pulled me out of frozen water 8 years earlier. I was looking for the NCO who always put his soldiers first. I was looking for the man who had integrity, even when it cost him professionally." She smiled through the tears. "What I found was all of that and more. I found someone who was worth the risk, worth the career complications, worth navigating every obstacle the world put between us." Her voice strengthened. "I promise to always see you the way I saw you that morning in the ravine, as someone worth fighting for. I promise to match your honesty with my own, to never let fear keep me from telling you what matters. I promise to be your teammate through every challenge, to help you navigate limitations while celebrating capabilities, to build a life with you that honors both our service and our love. I promise that when you fall, metaphorically or literally, I will always come looking for you." Major Osei smiled. "The rings, please." Chun produced 2 simple gold bands, military standard because both of them would deploy again and expensive jewelry was impractical. Quan took Torres's ring and slid it on her finger, holding her gaze as he did. Torres did the same, her hands steady despite the emotion evident on her face. "By the authority vested in me and in the presence of these witnesses," Major Osei said, "I now pronounce you married. You may kiss." Quan pulled Torres close and kissed her as the guests applauded, and the sun painted the mountains gold around them. The kiss was both gentle and fierce, a promise and a celebration and a recognition of everything they had overcome to reach this moment. When they broke apart, Torres was grinning. "Hello, husband. Hello, wife." Quan touched his forehead to hers. "We did it. We did." She laughed, navigated every regulation, overcame every obstacle, proved everyone wrong who said it was too complicated. They turned to face their guests, hands clasped, and walked back down the aisle together as Master Sergeant and Sergeant First Class Quan. The military would require paperwork, would need to ensure their assignments did not create conflicts, would continue to impose structure on their relationship. But they had proven they could work within that structure while honoring what mattered most. The reception was held in a barn on the family property, decorated with string lights and filled with the sound of laughter and music. Quan's mother had insisted on catering, had spent weeks preparing traditional dishes that she served alongside Torres's family barbecue. The fusion of cultures and traditions somehow worked perfectly, like everything else about their relationship. Brennan gave a toast that surprised everyone with its warmth. "I once wrote a eulogy for Daniel Quan," he said, glass raised. "Sat at my desk, trying to find something genuine to say about a soldier I had undervalued. I am grateful every day that I never had to deliver those words. Instead, I get to celebrate his marriage to the woman who proved me wrong about almost everything. To Daniel and Maya, who taught this old NCO that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you were wrong and change." Quan's father toasted in Cantonese, then translated. "My son chose a path I did not understand, chose service over safety, duty over comfort. But he also chose well in choosing Maya. She has the strength my wife has, the loyalty my son values, the courage they both demonstrate. To the new family they are building together." Torres's mother toasted with characteristic bluntness. "I raised my daughter to be independent and strong. Then she fell in love with a man who makes her stronger instead of trying to make her smaller. Daniel, you are good people. Welcome to the family." Chun toasted as best man, recounting the company's reaction when Quan had been found alive and the general consensus that Torres was either crazy or the most loyal soldier any of them had ever met. "Turns out she was both," he said. "And it turns out crazy and loyal is exactly what love looks like when it is real." As the evening deepened and the dancing began, Quan found himself standing outside the barn watching the celebrations through the open doors. The cool mountain air felt good after the warmth inside. His ankle was complaining about the day's activity, but he did not mind. Some pain was worth the experience that caused it. Torres appeared beside him, her dress exchanged for jeans and boots, more comfortable for dancing. "Sneaking away from your own wedding reception?" Just taking a moment, Quan put his arm around her shoulders. "Thinking about how far we have come from that ravine." "Long way." Torres leaned into him. "You were half frozen, and I was completely terrified I would not find you in time. Now look at us. Married, successful careers, families that actually approve." She smiled. "We did pretty well." "We did." Quan looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "You know what I think about sometimes? I think about the alternate timeline where you followed orders, where you stayed in your barracks that night, and I died from exposure. Everything that came after all of this only exists because you were willing to break the rules." Torres was quiet for a moment. "I think about that too. About how many good things in life come from choosing people over regulations when it really matters. Not recklessly, not without thought, but when the alternative is unacceptable. That is what you taught me. That sometimes courage looks like disobedience. That loyalty means acting even when you're not authorized. That love requires risk." She turned to face him fully. "What did I teach you about love specifically?" Quan thought about it. "That love is not about grand gestures or perfect moments. It is about showing up when things are hard, about walking into the dark because someone needs you, about choosing someone every day and doing the work to make it right even when complications arise." Torres kissed him softly. "Good answer. Now come dance with me before our guests think we abandoned them." They returned to the barn and danced to songs played by Torres's cousin's band, surrounded by everyone who mattered, celebrating not just a wedding, but the victory of having built something real and lasting from crisis and courage. Later, much later, when the reception had wound down and most guests had departed, Quan and Torres stood again on the ridgeline where they had been married. The moon was bright enough to see by, painting the landscape in silver instead of gold. If you enjoyed this story, please drop a comment and let us know your favorite part, character, or if you have had a similar situation happen to you before. Maybe you know someone who refused to give up when everyone else had, or someone who navigated complicated circumstances for love. Share your thoughts about what resonated most, whether it was the rescue, the recovery, or the relationship that grew from crisis into something lasting. Torres rested her head on Kwan's shoulder. 5 years ago, I was searching these mountains for you. 5 years ago, I was trying not to die. Kwan pulled her closer. Now we are married on a mountain and starting a whole new chapter. Think we can handle it. Marriage and careers and everything else. We survived the ravine. We survived recovery and separation and every regulation the army could throw at us. Kwan smiled. I think we can handle anything as long as we handle it together. They stood in comfortable silence, two soldiers who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Not completion, they were both already whole. But partnership, trust, the kind of love that was built through action and tested through adversity and proven through the choice to keep choosing each other. Below them, the barn lights were being extinguished one by one. Behind them, their future waited, full of deployments and challenges and the everyday work of building a life together. Above them, the stars watched, eternal witnesses to promises made and kept. And somewhere in the distance, mountains stood silent and strong, holding the story of a fall that became a rescue that became a relationship, and a relationship that became a marriage. Some stories ended with tragedy. Some ended with triumph. The best ones, the truest ones, ended with both. With the acknowledgement that life contained darkness and light, pain and joy, loss and love. That the worst moments could lead to the best ones if you were brave enough to keep moving forward. That sometimes all you needed was someone willing to walk into the dark to find you, and the courage to walk toward them when they did.